Welcome back, everybody, to this show floor here at .local New York. You're very welcome. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Shane McAlister. I'm one of the leads on the DevRel team here, and I'm delighted to be joined by Steve O'Grady, proper Irish name, principal analyst and co-founder of RedMonk. Steve, you're welcome to the show.
No, thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you on board. I had the pleasure of interviewing your co-founder,
Indeed.
James, at .local London last year. At that event, obviously, we did all the Gen AI stuff, and we're not going to be able to avoid it this time either.
No.
But what I wanted to dive into with you, first of all, as principal analyst, the day-to-days for you, where are you involved? How do you get stuck in? How do you navigate the developer world that we live in these days?
Yeah, so really at RedMonk, because our focus is on practitioners, we're often trying to just pull from as many different sources as we can, right? So in other words, that's obviously following individual developers on Twitter, that's mining, sort of quantitative data sources like, what's going on in GitHub, what's going on Stack Overflow, just talking to companies, that are building. Really, we're just looking for as many different sources of input as we can find. And then, we kind of sift through those sources of input and like, okay, what's the signal here, right? There's lots of things going on. What are the patterns?
How do you pick the signal from the noise?
That's right. That's the trick.
Okay. And obviously, look, the biggest signal over the last certainly year and a bit, if not longer, is Gen AI.
100%.
I want to leapfrog, though, and I want to talk about, you saw the keynote that we had earlier this morning in MongoDB. There was a ton of new releases, new enhancements, new products out there. What drew your attention from a developer perspective that, our ecosystem, the developers that you work with and listen to, what would be interesting to them from what you saw Dave or Sahir announce?
Yeah, so a couple things I think stood out to me. So sort of number one was having Vector and Search make their way into the Community Edition. I think that is very likely to be of high interest.
We've been asked to a lot of questions at the events like this. We've been asked that for a while, ever since we had Vector Search last year.
Yep. So that's going to be a big deal. That will certainly pique interest. The search nodes I think was interesting. In other words, being able to I'm trying to think of sort of the best way to frame it, but to have a little bit of independence, if you will, between some of your Gen AI tasks and your operational workloads. I thought was interesting. But there's so many different pieces, right? There's just, obviously there's a lot to talk about at these events. So those are, I think, a couple of the ones that stood out to me at least.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, obviously towards the end of certainly Sahir's presentation, he was talking a lot about performance increases and performance updates with MongoDB 8.0 and what that means to developers. And I think we're always conscious of making developers' lives easier. Taking away the mundane. So from that perspective, faster rebalancing, etc., all of that, do you think developers will jump on that in the 8.0 release that we just had?
Yeah, performance is always key, right? Because certainly in the early days of the sort of quote unquote NoSQL movement, that was always one of the knocks, right? Which was, oh, hey, these are more flexible data models, or they, allow me to work, with data in ways that are different. But, they're too slow or they're not performant and so on. And obviously we've come a long way since those days. I think that the sort of, focus on, hey, we want to, continue to eke out higher and higher performance is, certainly something that would be of interest.
Sure. And Atlas Edge Server, we live in a world of kind of devices on the edge of networks, smart devices, IoT. Do you think that will go down well with the community?
I'm a little biased in this because I don't tend to I don't love the term edge from an industry standpoint, not related to Mongo or the announcement today, simply because it's very problematic from a meaning standpoint because it can refer to things like CENs as much as IoT devices.
True,
right? So it's like, what does that actually mean? But
as an umbrella term, it can be a bit confusing.
As an umbrella term, I don't think it's super useful. But I think in this context, for what you're doing. Being able to push essentially data and the ability to operate on that data out into areas where you didn't have that capability before, for sure. In other words, just the ability to have a little location independence, if you will. I'm not always tied to my sort of single general purpose data store, in a either co-located or cloud facility. Basically. The ability to operate on data kind of wherever it is always a good thing.
And we announced that we had introduced range queries to Queriable Encryption too. I still don't know how Queriable Encryption works. It's like magic to me. Yeah. But I know from our key clients in the financial and healthcare section, this is super important for them.
Yeah. I mean, basically honestly, the ability to, so back up. So in other words, when we think about, sort of modern infrastructure and modern data storage, right? The ability to encrypt that and keep that data safe, whatever it might be, whether it's PII or sensitive data of any stripe, right? So the ability to encrypt and protect that data is huge. But obviously, historically, that's come with some trade-offs, right? It's much more difficult to work with. So great, it's safe, but it's also harder for me to operate on and work with. When you introduce the ability to operate more effectively on data that's already been encrypted, you kind of get the best of both worlds, right? Where it's like, okay, great, this is secure, I feel better about that, but also I'm not prevented from doing the things that I want to do with that data.
Yeah. And it was interesting to see Adobe join us on stage as well too. We all know their products, we use their products, but I don't think the person on the street, as it were, would have them as a data company, but it was very evident from what the two representatives from Adobe were on the stage. They are a data company.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And, that's the thing, particularly, even sort of in years past, Adobe obviously has huge, data assets behind it. This is even more true, right? With what they're doing with some of their Gen AI, materials, because obviously the sort of, the heart, as it were, of, really any of these Gen AI activities is, huge, large corpuses of data, right? That you need to leverage to train models, that will allow us to do all the magical things that we see. And, certainly Adobe is no exception in that regard.
So you got to the Gen AI word before I did, Steve,
there you go.
right? I said I was pushing it towards the back of the field, but we cannot avoid it. Any tech conference can't avoid it. I think you said every conference is an AI conference now, right? Is that the general feeling across everybody needs to be in this space?
Yeah, and I think, really what's ended up happening is that, AI obviously is a huge trend across the industry. That's not a secret at this point.
Sure.
But it is, interesting in that it is, a transformative technology that impacts everybody in an org, right? So in other words, if we think about trends that we've seen at RedMonk, right? NoSQL, sort of which Mongo is an example, or Kubernetes and containers and so on, they traditionally impacted, either DBAs or developers or, whatever. Gen AI has an impact on everything, right? If you're in marketing, if you're in sales, if you're in retail, doesn't matter, right? It's going to impact your job in some way, some fashion. And so, really, we see that being reflected in the importance of virtually every conference we go to now, because, it is a cliche, it's a joke, sort of as you mentioned, I tweeted about it this morning, but it was not, it's not a criticism, because that's what people want to hear. So if you have all the attendees here and you show up and you don't mention AI, they're going to say, well, wait, what? Do you not do that? Are you not suited for that? Is that not something people are doing with those workloads? So, It really is just the case that they kind of all have to be. Every conference at this point has to mention it, because it's just core of what we're all doing.
Yeah, and Dave, our CEO, mentioned it as a crucible moment, kind of this step change in productivity and development as well too. As an analyst with RedMonk and in this space, I suppose the impact on developers, on the developer experience, how do you view that?
Well, I think it's huge. In one of the panels this morning, one of the partner of yours, sort of in the AI space, basically said as a developer, he's like, I will never code without, a coding assistant again, right? It just makes me 10x or 100x for more productive. And that's kind of how we see it, particularly from a developer standpoint. The developers that we talk to are much more productive, much faster. Even if it's saying taking tedium out, right? I don't want to write tests. I don't want to write scaffolding. Have the assistant do that for me, and that's going to continue. We're going to see more and more of that spread.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be, obviously I was heavily involved in some code assistant fine tuning and training. We're now heavily involved in some of the orchestration, the agents, etc. as well too.
Yep.
We're seeing, I suppose, the mundane tasks maybe being done by these agents, for example, free developers up to do more productive work.
And that's what you want.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so are you skeptical at all of our AI future in this space? Are you all in, Steve?
No, I mean, I'd say, I think some of the promises are probably a little extravagant, but it's real, it's here, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and Dave showed that S-curve of where we are and how internet companies over the last 20, 30 years have been. we're in that curve somewhere, but I think we're at the beginning of this curve and moving quickly.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out how it fits and what that means.
Excellent. Well, listen, on that optimistic and positive note, Steve O'Grady from RedMonk, it's been a pleasure to join me and the rest of our audience here at MongoDB.local New York. Thank you for joining us.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Excellent.